For me, it was, of course, not that difficult at all because I was just lying there. I remember I was lying there on that beach, and these guys were all crawling around me and doing their painting and stuff like that. I fell asleep because it was just so soothing. It was like getting a massage on a beach or something like that. So this was the least difficult moment of my making of Conan.
John Milius and I spent an incredible amount of time building model airplanes and painting them in these different camouflage motifs. And I think it was from that he had this idea, well, let's camouflage the bodies. Arnold and Sandel and I had to go all get painted up so that they could see what we looked like. And John knew already, even before we did it, that it was going to look good. That's why we did it.
The thing about that paint, though, that was so terrible, it was soap-based because they didn't want it to crack. So it itched. You would have this on and your skin would just, ugh. As I remember in one of the hotels we were staying in, a day of shooting in that war paint, and we couldn't wash it off. There was no water. So we had to sleep in it.
The real hidden truth of the cult of Set and of the cult of Thulsa Doom was that they were cannibals and that they were eating human beings and tasting of the most forbidden fruit. And so you wanted to see that. You wanted to see all the bodies that are skinned and gutted like animals hanging up, and then making the soup, the sacred soup, and carrying it. And we called it split pea in hand because it looked like split pea soup, but you saw these hands in it, you know. All these sets, everything always had a reflection in history. And so the Stonehenge, there were many all over Europe. There were these temples that were built with rocks on top of one another, especially in circles like that and everything. So Ron wanted to do that. And what was really quite amazing was how quickly they did it.
We reshaped the desert to build 2 huge sand hills. You know, the big Stonehenge boulders were all styrofoam and with fiberglass coatings, and it was right on the money. It was exactly what we needed to stage the whole in sequence in.
The one trap is really good, you know, where you see him building that, and it really works because you see his helmet and you see him hit it with the hammer, which sets the whole thing off, then it swings around and skewers him. And I love Arnold where he's looking at Sven hanging on the thing going, "What's wrong? Are you upset today?"
John is a military tactician, and he thinks like a military general. So everything that was involved in that final battle, from the punji sticks and the spike that went through Sven-Ole Thorsen and things like that, all came from John. The trickiness of making those things work is to integrate the technology into what we have to do physically with an actor.
There was absolutely no animals injured. The only animals were the Great Danes, these huge Scandinavian guys. They were the only ones who were ever injured. But the animals themselves, real animals, were never injured.
Talking about animal rights activists, they picketed that sequence that I was involved in. It looked supposedly so real to the animal rights people that they questioned the truth of the stunt. And they thought that this horse had gone through these punji sticks that were used in Vietnam. And they talked to John about this. And I think John's answer to those people was very succinct. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, did you see a stunt man falling through those sticks prior to the horse going through them? When that horse fell down the hill, there was a stunt man ahead of the horse. Do you think the stunt man died? No. Well, the horse didn't die either. They were made out of rubber."
The violence in Conan fits. There's no gratuitous violence. There's no making fun of violence. To me, violence is really repugnant when it cheapens human life. One of the things that was very good about Conan as compared to other comic book characters is that Conan could be hurt. Conan was mortal, you know. Conan didn't come through these fights unscarred, either physically or mentally.
He wore a specific harness, protected him from the ear to the shoulder, because I was supposed to hack on the beginning of the neck. We practiced it, first with a very light sword and then with a heavier sword, and it was amazing that because of all the practice that we've done for this scene, that James Earl Jones felt comfortable enough that he actually himself stood there. So I did the scene over and over with him from behind my shoulder, from the side, over his shoulder and all that. And I think they used in a dummy for some close-up from behind where they didn't need either one of us.
Thoughts of Doom is in the movie only as that element that leads Arnold on his quest for revenge. And until Arnold gets underway, he is only focused on revenge. That's all he thinks about. He's not a hero until he goes beyond revenge to kill the evil force for the whole world. Then he becomes a hero.
The idea was that was always going to give you a hint that this was going to be more than one movie. It should have been the beginning of the trilogy. The trilogy was, each one was about something. And the first one was about strength, raw strength. The second one was about responsibility. And the third one was about kind of tradition and loyalty. You know, where I was going was that ultimately there are things that people do things for that are larger than them.
John wanted Basil to do the score from the very beginning. And we had some discussions with Dino and some of the other people about having Ennio Morricone do it. But John insisted that it was something that Basil could do.
From the time that I was set to write the music from Conan until I recorded it was probably a period of a year. At that point, before John went off to Spain to start shooting, he had requested that I come up with several thematic concepts for the film. And these aren't finished pieces of music by any stretch of the imagination. Sometimes there are no more than 8 measures of music, a melody, a phrase. So he had the probably four major themes of the film, which he took off when he started shooting. Conan, however, had some very serious requirements in that you're dealing with prehistory. John always envisioned this thing taking place 10,000 years before recorded history. So what does that mean musically? So we explored the concepts of, we'll use antique instruments. But then we realized that isn't even far enough back. Medieval is, fairly modern compared to Conan. He knew he wanted it to be operatic. There was no question in his mind that because there was so little dialogue, that the music really had to carry a lot of the story. The Wheel of Pain sequence, basically I knew that we should incorporate a lot of metallic sounds and try to get some strange sense of another world. So I think we had a couple of chains and things like that going on. We incorporate this Chinese gong, which is made out of very precious metals, and we took a triangle beater and literally had the percussionist rake it across this thing. So as it hits the edges of these things, it makes this scraping sound, and that was the sound of the scrape. There's something about the funeral pyre that I think is eloquent. It's one of the smaller pieces in the film in terms of the size of the orchestra, and I think because of that there's an economy of force, but there's also a strident kind of quality to it because I needed fewer instruments to do a lot more. I had also had a dream the night before. My wife and my 2 daughters had gone to Florence, and I dreamt that they had died, and I had this whole image of death in a hooded thing with these ropes for a face, and I could remember every piece of it vividly. It's all part of why I wrote it the way I wrote it, because I wrote it the next morning. I was writing the orgy section of the film. It's just sort of the basic riff. And one day my daughter, who was studying recorder at school, walks in and she starts playing a counter melody to what I was doing on the piano. And I thought, this is really good. And I sort of wrote it down and put it on 8 French horns, what she was playing. As a surprise, I brought her out when we were recording that scene and had her sit on the podium, And I thought she'd be thrilled, and it was over. And I looked down at her and I said, well, Zoe, what did you think of that? She goes, well, you didn't get it right. She already had this concept that there's a way music's supposed to be, and if it isn't that, it doesn't matter. You put it on 20 French horns and it's not going to impress her. Conan was a chance to really speak with a very strong and hopefully unusual voice. I think it summed up everything I knew about music to that time, and also gave me a chance to say, this is my idea about what this is.
The studio was very nervous because the movie was very violent. I mean, at the time we got an X 3 times before we finally got it to be an R-rated picture. In Vegas, at the sneak preview, we showed up at the theater, and like an hour and a half before the screening, there were lines around the block, you know, with all these guys, and there were all these bikers in leather and chain, and they were all waiting in line, and there were more people than there were seats in the theater. So we pulled another movie from another theater, and we showed the movie 3 times the same night.
We had such a tremendous turnout that we had to bicycle the prints from one theater to another.
I remember the greatest thing was to go in the theater at that moment that I knew everyone would love, that moment where natural selection has selected him, and he looks up from pushing the wheel of pain, and it's Arnold. People went nuts.
We really knew when we showed that movie that we had a win on our hands. I became plugged in to a huge machinery, unlike anything that I ever expected in my career, that I would make such a big leap forward, and that this could be my chance to step out of my past, the bodybuilding past, and step into the national arena of show business.
I often think of the review in Time magazine, which was very short, which called it Star Wars by a Psychopath. They completely dismissed it, you know, it was just claptrap of sword and sorcery and that kind of thing. And yet, it does seem to have an effect on people. I think that I look at it as, in my thing, I look at everything as a battle, because I always wanted to be a general. I never wanted to be a director, you know. And this was a large battle. This was a divisional-sized battle. And it was very carefully designed, conceived of, and executed with great skill and valor, and the battle was won.
Thank you.
So
it just shows
this is the show
that even when you work on a documentary about the making of Conan, there's injuries and danger involved. It never stops.
Thank you.